Welcome to Art Talk Tuesday, episode 12. As you can see this week, I have another black and white piece up. It is also a scratchboard piece. This will be our third discussion of scratchboard in black and white. Next week, we're going to go back to color. It will probably be a watercolor piece, but we'll see. I have to think about it and meditate on it a little bit. The piece I have up for today is entitled Breaking Through the Veil. As you can see, the dimensions are 24 by 18, so it's more horizontal format than it is vertical. This piece was created, I don't remember how long ago, not too long, maybe about 4 years ago. It is dealing with the ascension theme. If you look at some of the previous episodes, if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see that I talked about the idea of ascension through a piece called The Son of Man Ascends, and then Rise of the Buddha Nature. This is about the ascension theme, but it's not as specific as the other two pieces were. I also have a third piece that maybe I'll discuss next week that deals with the theme of ascension. My piece, The Awakening, which we talked about, was it last week? Week before last, was about ascension in a way. So here I'm kind of playing with this kind of theme using different mediums and exploring different concepts of how we can relate the idea of ascension and what that means. This particular piece here, what we can see, I kind of wanted to have a circular format. So you can see the format is rather round, but also in terms of we're coming here from darkness to blackness, back to that in the ending portion of the piece. So we really are reading this from a horizontal situation, left to right, just like you would read a book or a page in a book. So we have my inspiration with this piece was really the idea of the traveling of the soul or the spirit through the process of physical materiality, moving from the spiritual dimension into the third dimension of physical reality, and then moving back into from whence it has come. And this whole idea, the notion of things being circular, and of the whole idea of the spiritual life being a circular situation. We often think of time as linear because that's the way we document it, but in reality, if you look at it deeply, it has been proven that time really goes in these little cycles, just like this. They move around, and a lot of the ancients thought of times in terms of a circle, just as we have the seasons. You go around through the circle of the seasons and you come back to where you started and you keep repeating again. So this whole linear idea is very new on the human horizon, and in some ways it hasn't served us as well as we would like. But here we are, this is what we deal with. So it's oftentimes it's comfortable for us to get out of that mode of thinking, get out of that paradigm, and begin to see things in a different way, because everything repeats itself in some form. In some ways, we have, what do we say, advanced in incredible ways technologically, but from a spiritual standpoint, we're very naive, still very young, almost in an infantile stage in comparison to other beings in the universe and in the spiritual world. So having said that, let's move on to talk about this piece. So this symbol here is symbolic of a soul or spirit. I have developed this symbol. It came to me in my meditation practice one day as I was contemplating the idea of ascension and really thinking about what that means to embody that, to embody the spirit, to embody the soul. I listened to some work by a woman named Jonette Crowley, who does an exercise. It's a technique that she uses called soul body fusion, in which the premise is to allow the spirit and the soul to be more deeply embedded into the body, and so that comes out into the everyday life. So I use that technique at least once a week. But this whole idea of the spirit or soul moving into physical matter. So this is my idea of what this represents. You see, we have the basically kind of light, fire, whatever you want to call this, bursting forth. And this symbolizes energy, because spirit often is energy. Okay, this whole idea of this conscious energy, though, but not what we want to say, what we see in this dimension as unconscious energy, but conscious energy which is conscious of itself. And then, so this is pouring forth symbolizing energy. And then this I here in the center is that whole idea of consciousness, because when we talk about the notion of consciousness, it is also about awareness, and it is also about sight. So even though we think about conscious in terms of a very cerebral way, it also in our physical world is definitely very embodied in our senses, and we don't pay enough attention to developing all of our senses as acutely as we could. It would open up other doors of awareness that we have no idea even existed. So this a whole idea of the notion of consciousness involving sight. We are sight-oriented animals, sight-oriented beings. That's why our eyes are placed in front of our head. When we talk about things, often in metaphors, they are, I see, oh, I get it. It became clear. So this whole notion of sight and seeing as part of consciousness. So that's where this idea comes from for me. And so we see that this soul, this spirit, is in what? Darkness. This whole idea of darkness. Not darkness as it being something negative, but darkness as being just the absence of light and a place of birth. The birth canal is dark. We don't experience light until we actually physically are birthed into the world. So this whole idea and notion of darkness, if we look at science and quantum theory, they talk about now the antimatter, or there being the spaces between the space. And actually there's more spaces between antimatter than there is actually matter in the universe. And so this whole idea of everything taking place in darkness, in silence, in stillness, and then birthing forth. So that's what I'm playing with here in the notion of the blackness. And so you see a portion of this light, a portion of this consciousness breaks through. It breaks through the darkness and breaks through into what? The physical plane. That's what we see happening here. And so it begins to take shape into a form. And here we see the form that I have here is that of a baby, a child, symbolizing entering into the physical world through the idea of the flesh. The body begins, this spiritual consciousness becomes what? Enfleshed, incarnos, which is Latin for in flesh. And so it becomes in flesh. This flesh begins to form. I purposely wanted to leave things kind of ambiguous. I didn't want to be too literal and too detailed with this. So you see the form is kind of in a small shape. You could almost imagine maybe that the baby is still in the womb, but maybe not. So I like to leave a little ambiguity in my work to kind of let the viewer decide what they want to see or what certain things mean. Of course, if they ask me, I can always give them interpretation as I'm giving you now. But, you know, I'm open to, sometimes people see things that you can't see. They often say we do more than we can say. And so this spirit breaking forth into this material world, being in birth, enfleshed, incarnate, embodied, this whole notion of embodiment, being in our bodies. A lot of times we aren't. We live here on this earth, and most of us are not in our bodies most of the time. We don't breathe properly. We breathe too shallowly. We don't pay enough attention to our experience because we're always thinking about the next thing or living in the past and not being in the present. That's where this whole notion of mindfulness comes through. So this being in the body, embodiment, and being in flesh. And as we do that, you see in this figure here, I've kind of played around with the face and the eyes because this is really not quite a baby's face. It's kind of more mature face. And I kind of did that on purpose. Everything is distorted. And I kind of wanted it to be that way because I'm just kind of playing around with this whole idea of flesh morphing. And I wanted to give a sense of things morphing and changing because the body does change, right? The body you have as an infant when you're born into the world is completely different than the body you leave here with when you transition. So playing with that notion of things changing, morphing. See here in this eye, there is a spark. And this spark is reminiscent of the initial spark of consciousness here. If you ever look into a baby's eyes or you look into the eyes of an old person, you kind of can see that spark there. Or you can see it diminishing sometime in an older person because as we begin to age, it's said that the soul knows, the soul and spirit knows that they are about to transition back into the other realm. And so a lot of times people begin to let things go. They begin to releasing things. They may give things away. They may stop doing certain activities that they once really enjoyed because the soul is beginning to detach from the spiritual world and knows that its time is coming, and so it begins to detach. And here, this whole idea of consciousness still being that light, just symbolized here. So we have the same kind of symbol going on in the eye here. And this eye doesn't have a pupil. It's just open, kind of blank. And that is for this whole idea of the clean slate, because we can't take all of the consciousness that we have here in this realm into this body. Our body simply won't hold it. They can't contain it. And so we only take a small portion. And so this kind of idea of kind of being blank, we think of babies as being mostly blank slates. And so they are imprinted from the stimuli from the world, from their parents, other things. So that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And then we have these emanations falling out here, going away. If you see this shape, it more distinctly mirrors the shape of the figure here. But as it diminishes, As it goes further out, you see that the shape begins to get more and more amorphous. And I did that on purpose, symbolizing the decline of the body, symbolizing the movement away from the disintegration of the flesh, of this embodiment, until eventually, as we grow old and die, we move back into, the consciousness moves back into that eternal darkness, that eternal blackness, that silence, that consciousness that is above all consciousness once again. So that's kind of what I'm playing with in this piece. Hope you enjoyed that discussion. Like I said, next week we'll talk about watercolor or color piece. Also, if you like these, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't just like it on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Give that a like, and I will talk to you next week. Be well.